Hey guys. Tonight, we descend into a world where justice doesn't come with a powdered wig and a tidy courtroom. No. This time you're waking up below the deck of a Portuguese galley, in the early 1600s, face pressed against damp wood. The scent of sweat and rot coiling up your nose like a bad omen. A faint moan echoes beside you. You're shackled. Of course, every twist of your ankle reminds you that your fate is no longer yours. Welcome aboard one of Portugal's infamous prison ships, where you don't just serve time, you row it, bleed it, breathe it. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift, wincing, as your wrists pull against rusted iron cuffs somewhere overhead. Boots pound the deck. A splash of water hits your back. It's not rain. One of the guards decided you looked a little too comfortable. You're on a carceral galley, one of the most brutal floating institutions Portugal devised during its imperial heyday. These ships weren't just transport. They were prisons, tools of war, sweatshops with sails, and death traps all in one. The logic is beautifully cruel: sentence a man to hard labor, then turn him into the engine of your ship. You, and about 150 others, chained to a bench, gripping a long oar as wide as your thigh. You row to the rhythm of a drum you don't control, driven by the threat of a whip that never quite stops swinging. You don't steer the ship, you fuel it. And if you die, they'll find another. The galleys sail from Lisbon, down to the African coast, into the teeth of the Indian Ocean. You're not rowing toward freedom. You're rowing toward more conquest, more spice, more gold, more bodies in chains like your own. And while France and England eventually swapped galleys for sails and steam, Portugal clung to them longer than anyone else. Historians still argue whether it was sheer stubbornness or a cruelly effective punishment that kept the system alive. Your days are measured by oar strokes, your nights by aches. If the ship docks briefly in Madeira, the Azores, or Goa, you don't disembark. Maybe they throw some moldy bread below deck. Maybe someone gets dragged off for punishment, too sick to row, or too rebellious. If you're lucky, it's not your turn. If you're unlucky, they bring out the cat-o' nine tails, or something less poetic. You can't help but laugh quietly because the name galley slave has such an old-timey ring to it. But there's nothing quaint here, just calluses, salt sores, and backs that haven't been dry in months. Occasionally, a new prisoner arrives. Maybe it's a minor thief. Maybe a political dissident. One guy claimed he was just a poet who made the wrong joke in Lisbon. No one laughed. You learn quickly that innocence is just a rumor. The empire didn't care if you were guilty. It only cared if you were useful. And here's a funny little tidbit: some nobles volunteered for service on galleys, temporarily. As a way of earning holy penance, they rowed for a few weeks, then strutted back into society, cleansed. Meanwhile, you're here indefinitely, lungs full of brine, rowing through purgatory without an exit strategy. Sometimes the ship takes on water, or drifts into a tropical storm. One time, a crew member muttered that the punishment ships were cursed, haunted by the ghosts of Moorish slaves. or possessed by Yemeni sea spirits, angry at the Portuguese for raiding their harbors. You didn't believe it. But the groaning wood during a monsoon made you wonder. Of course, nothing supernatural happens, just broken ribs and lost fingers. At sunrise, the light filters through the slats above you. You see it hit a man across from you, a former priest, they say, who stole relics from a church. His skin's peeling from the salt. He hasn't spoken in days. Beside him, someone starts singing. Off-key. Half-mad. The melody sounds like a nursery rhyme. But in this place, even lullabies feel like punishments. You hear that in some other parts of the empire, Brazil. Angola. Go. They used galleys as mobile prisons during inspections. You can't decide if that's smarter or just meaner. They didn't want jails clogging up their pretty colonial cities. So they dumped the sentenced at sea. Out of sight. Out of mind. Floating penance. Empire style. Your worst fear isn't the lash. It's falling overboard during a storm. Still shackled. The sea looks free from the edge of the deck. But it's just another version of confinement. At least here. You know what your pain is. Down there. You'll be forgotten before your bubbles stop rising. And then, one morning, they bring a man up on deck, his chains clinking like wind chimes. He's grinning. That's your first warning. Only madmen smile here. He says he escaped from a galley before. Fled into the African interior. But they caught him. This time, they don't just beat him. They hang him from the yardarm and leave him swaying in the sun for 2 days. You try not to look, but the sound of the rope creaking becomes part of your dreams. By now, your back's a map of healed-over stripes. You've eaten more rats than bread, and you've developed a sixth sense for when the overseer is about to lash someone based on how he squints at the sky. He likes to time it with sunset, thinks it's dramatic. You wonder if he missed his calling as a theater actor. No one tells you how long your sentence is. Some men serve 6 months. Others, in week 2. You hear that in Lisbon. There's a ledger listing names, crimes, and durations. But out here, there's just time. And the rowing. And maybe one day, if you're no longer useful, they'll dump you on some foreign shore with a crust of bread and a stick, and call it release. And that, by the standards of the empire, is considered merciful. Still think you'd have made a dashing rogue in the 16th century. Might want to reconsider. Because tonight, you're not the hero of a swashbuckling novel. You're just another number chained to an oar, drifting slowly across an empire that prizes gold more than breath. You awaken to the sound of hooves outside the compound walls, thick wooden gates just beginning to stir. The early light creeps in through bamboo slats, and the humidity is already unbearable. Like someone wrapped your lungs in damp wool. This isn't Lisbon anymore. You're in Goa, the prized jewel of Portugal's Indian Ocean Empire, where justice doesn't wait for due process. It gallops in. Whip first, a rooster crows nearby, startling you upright, just in time to see the enforcers arrive. Their uniforms are crisp, their boots absurdly polished, given the mud they'll soon trudge through, and tucked beneath their belts, coiled like hungry snakes, are the real symbols of Portuguese order in this faraway land. Leather whips. Long, cracked, darkened by years of use. These aren't ceremonial, they're wet with yesterday's sweat. You shift where you sit, hoping not to attract attention. You're about to witness what the locals whisperingly call a danza do chicote, the whip dance, a colonial punishment designed less to rehabilitate and more to remind everyone who's in charge. And here in Goa, where Portugal built its Catholic utopia on top of centuries of Indian kingdoms, that reminder had to come often and loud. They dragged the accused from a side alley. He's thin, barefoot, wearing a threadbare tunic that does nothing to disguise the tremble in his knees. His crime, petty theft, allegedly, could have been stealing bread, or reciting the Vedas too loudly, or maybe he just made eye contact with the wrong man at the wrong time. Historians still argue whether colonial charges were ever more than vague excuses for public spectacle. The truth, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the crowd gathers, just like they always do. Spectacle attracts flies. The soldiers tie his wrists to a wooden post. Then, without ceremony, the whip comes down. Once, twice, a dozen times. Each crack sounds like thunder in your ears. You flinch with every strike. And you're not even the one being punished. The worst part. The man doesn't scream. Not at first. He stares blankly forward, his jaw clenched like he's chewing glass. But when the skin starts to open, and the whip kisses blood, that's when the sound comes half groan, half cry, all human. You learn quickly that in Goa, this isn't a rare occurrence. It's policy. Official punishments were laid out in colonial codes, written in ink and sealed with pomp. But the execution of those laws, that was left to men who didn't mind a bit of improvisation. Whipping was considered economical, memorable, and deliciously symbolic. No need for jail cells when a man's back can become the notice board of imperial warning. And it wasn't just for locals. Portuguese settlers, soldiers, even priests weren't exempt. One Jesuit is said to have been whipped publicly for violating the bishop's ban on gambling. He claimed he was evangelizing through dice. The bishop disagreed. Guess who got the lash? There was even a time, during the tenure of Viceroy Francisco da Gama, when officers were encouraged to whip Portuguese sailors who drank too much arak in the market streets. Because nothing says sober up like a strip of hide across your spine, but perhaps the most surreal detail comes from how formal these sessions could be. Sometimes, the whipping took place in front of the church steps. Yes, during Mass, while the priest carried on, pretending not to hear. Picture it, incense in the air, schwarboys singing, and just off to the side, a man being flayed like yesterday's fish. Because, after all, pain purifies. Or so they said. Some whippings were even done by proxy. Rich offenders would hire a stand-in to take their punishment for them, usually a desperate servant or slave. The audience didn't mind. Pain is pain. And justice is apparently transferable, like a bus ticket. You overhear locals talking in hushed Konkani. Some with sympathy. Others with resignation. They've seen it all before. One older woman mutters something about karma catching up with the Portuguese. She gets a side-eye from a soldier. But nothing more. Not today. A whisper passes through the crowd. Tomorrow's whipping will be of a woman. That changes everything. Women weren't often whipped in public. When they were, it was considered a statement usually religious. There's talk that she's a convert who tried to return to Hindu worship. Apostasy, they say. Or witchcraft. Or both. Details shift with each rumor. But the punishment, that remains constant. Flesh will meet leather. You spend that night wondering what it must be like to be her. The shame. The spectacle. In some ways, it's worse than death. Portugal had outlawed execution by crucifixion. Sure. But humiliation. That was evergreen. Especially when it served the goal of conversion. And here's a fringe detail that'll stick with you sometimes after a whipping. The punished were forced to walk the streets, wearing signs, declaring their crime. Blasphemer. Idler. Sorcerer. The signs were made of wood and tied around their necks with rope, turning people into walking billboards of imperial morality. You imagine that smell: sweat, blood, damp wood, and indignity. By midweek, you're called into the square again, not as a victim, thankfully, but as part of the crowd. This time, it's a sailor. Whipped for breaking curfew. He pleads with the guards. Says he was just visiting his sick mother. Doesn't matter. They beat him anyway. And the onlookers. They nod. Shrug. Someone says, if they let one off, the rest will riot. It starts to eat at you. Not just the violence, but the banality of it. This isn't rage or revenge. It's administration. The whip isn't punishment. It's paperwork. Every lashing is a line filled in on a ledger you'll never see. And yet, there's a haunting efficiency to it. Cheaper than prison. Faster than a trial. Public enough to keep the next guy from stepping out of line. At least, in theory. Historians debate whether these public beatings actually prevented crime or just hardened hearts. You suspect the latter. One afternoon, you stumble upon a drunken official being gently escorted home. No whip in sight. Rank has its privileges. His assistant laughs. He's too important to bruise. You stare at the cracked backs of men punished for stealing a mango, and realize the whip doesn't strike everyone the same. The empire is precise about where it lands. You begin to recognize the enforcers. There's the one with the lazy eye who always flinches before a strike. The tall one who sings hymns while doling out pain. The short one who wipes his whip down like it's a prized violin bow. And then there's you, quietly realizing that being spared the lash doesn't mean you've escaped it. Not really. You carry the tension in your shoulders, the hyper-awareness in your breath, the nightmares that leave you gasping long after the crowd has dispersed. One day, you hear of a man who requested the whip instead of prison, hoping to get it over with. He misjudged. The guards misunderstood or pretended to. He died after 20 lashes. The priest called it God's will. Everyone else called it Tuesday. And so, another day ends in Goa. The lashes fade, but the memory clings like damp clothes. You lie awake in your cot, tracing the sound of each crack in your mind, like thunder after lightning. You wonder who designed this system, who decided that justice should echo off stone walls and leave red marks on brown skin. The whip of Goa isn't just a punishment, it's a performance. And like all performances, it needs an audience. Lucky you. You're gagging. Not from pain this time, but from the sour, metallic stench of burned meat and scorched cloth. You're standing in a tiled courtyard in Lisbon, surrounded by the thick hum of anticipation. The bells of São Domingo's church have just stopped ringing. There's incense in the air, though it does little to mask the other scent. You don't want to be here. But then again, neither does the man kneeling before the crowd, his mouth stuffed with linen, his hands tied behind his back, and his eyes wild, with the kind of terror that doesn't need translation. It's auto da fide, And guess what crime he's confessed to? Speaking his mind. Tongue punishments were especially creative during the Portuguese Inquisition. And Lisbon, as the beating heart of empire, hosted the finest performances. Blasphemy wasn't just frowned upon, it was theatrical. And nothing silences a heretic like tearing or slicing the very thing he used to offend God, the tongue. You feel yours dry up just thinking about it. The man in front of you. He'd questioned a priest, asked whether angels could sin. En innocent de bête. Maybe. But someone reported it. And here we are. Historians still argue whether these accusations came from sincere belief or petty revenge. Either way, the Inquisition loved a good whisper. Even the neighbor who borrowed your ladle could turn you in. You try not to look directly, but the Grand Inquisitor raises his hand, and the guards step forward. They're holding tongs, not blacksmith tools. Mind you, but a specialized pair used solely for one purpose. The crowd leans in, as if watching an opera. There's even a food vendor selling roasted chestnuts just behind you. The absurdity of it makes you laugh, but too loud. And you might be next. The punishment isn't instant. They begin by reading his crimes aloud, his heresies catalogued in elaborate Latin while the accused groans through his gag. When they finally approach with the tongs, there's a hush. You know what's coming. And yet your stomach still tightens like a fist. The tongs close. There's a wet, unpleasant sound. The man's scream is muffled but clear enough. And then someone near you claps. Not a standing ovation. Just a polite gesture of approval. A job well done. You want to turn away, but you're stuck. This is the price of being here. You're not a heretic yet, but your silence is complicit. Inquisitions weren't limited to philosophers and theologians. Housewives were tried for saying they preferred old prayers. Sailors were accused of muttering charms before voyages. One man was sentenced after suggesting St. Peter had bad taste in fish. And the punishments weren't always bloody. Sometimes they forced the guilty to wear sanbenitos, shame robes, yellow with big red crosses, and march through town with bells attached. Others were imprisoned underground. In places so damp their voices changed pitch from mold growing in their throats. You heard that from a friar once. Though whether it's true or just a particularly nasty metaphor, you'll never know. What you do know is that the tongue punishments held a special place. Maiming the mouth wasn't just symbolic, it was social. You couldn't gossip, couldn't testify, couldn't kiss, sing, or even beg. You became a mute reminder of what happens when speech defies the crown and cross. You remember hearing of a young girl 15, maybe accused of mocking the saints. She was said to have laughed during Mass. When questioned, she claimed it was a sneeze. The tribunal didn't buy it. They spared her tongue, but branded her lips with a hot iron. She wore a veil the rest of her life. Eventually, she vanished. Some say she moved north. Others say she died from infection. No one says her name out loud anymore. And if you're wondering, yes, the Inquisition kept records. Tons of them. Indexes of offenses. Lists of interrogations. Graphic illustrations of tongue piercings and bifurcations done with hot knives. Somewhere, a bored scribe catalogued it all, like it was groceries. Future historians would read these files in quiet horror, marveling at how casually it was all normalized. A fringe fact for your nightmares, some punishments included caging the head, placing a spiked iron mask over the face to restrict movement and prevent even silent mouthing. If you couldn't speak, You also couldn't pray. The idea wasn't just to punish, it was to isolate, to sever you from God and man alike. By dusk, the courtyard clears. The man is gone, hauled off for whatever passes as recovery. The tongs are cleaned and put away. The priests file back into the church like nothing happened. And the crowd, they murmur, chuckle, disperse. Some talk about supper. Others wonder if tomorrow's procession will be more exciting. You stay still, your tongue still pressed against the roof of your mouth like it's trying to hide. Later that night, you pass a street preacher, whispering psalms into his sleeve. He sees your face, pauses, and mouths something silently. You don't understand it, but you nod anyway. Here, in Lisbon, words are dangerous even in the dark, especially in the dark. You sleep badly. Your dreams are filled with the echoes of garbled cries, twisted Latin chants, and iron tools tapping on stone tables. You wake up gasping, tongue dry, throat clenched, terrified that somehow you've spoken out loud in your sleep. The next morning, you avoid the main plaza. Too risky. Instead, you slip into the back alleys where people speak in low tones and rarely look each other in the eye. There's graffiti scratched onto a wall, a crude drawing of a priest with a swollen head and no mouth. It's childlike, eerie, and oddly defiant. Someone taps your shoulder. An old man, hunched, missing half his teeth. He gestures for silence, then points at his own tongue, or where it should have been. You can't tell if it was taken by punishment or time, but the message is clear. He traces a cross in the air, then disappears. You're left staring at the wall, wondering who else lost their words in this city. How many mouths stitched shut by fear, or force, or fire. The punishment wasn't always physical. Sometimes, they made examples of a few so the rest would self-police. You think of all the things you wanted to say today and didn't. Later that week, you hear of a woman named Isabella. She was a midwife, respected, until someone claimed she'd spoken a curse during a difficult birth. The child died. The mother wept. Isabella was dragged from her home and questioned for days. She confessed under duress, meaning someone used the chair with the spikes again. Her sentence, silence. They didn't cut her tongue, but they stitched her lips together with thread and bitumen, said it was reversible. But no one ever saw her speak again. You walk past the church that night and see candlelight flickering in the windows. Inside, the priests sing beautifully, Latin hymns rising like incense. For them, language is sacred, protected. For you, a liability. Every word a gamble. In the end, the cruelty of tongue punishments wasn't just the blood or the tools. It was the way they took the most human thing you had, your voice, and turned it into a crime scene. A place where even your own breath betrayed you. And here's the final irony, Lisbon. This city of silenced mouths was once famous for poetry, music, debate, but beneath the romance of fado songs and tiled facades lies a history of muffled screams and careful speech. You walk away, more cautious than ever, your tongue pressed behind your teeth like a secret too dangerous to share. The smoke reaches your nose before you see the fire. It's thick, oily, and unmistakably human. You're standing in a square in Coimbra, but it could be Evora, Porto, or even faraway Goa. The setup is always the same. A raised platform of wood, A cross erected center stage. Ropes, chains, and sometimes, if the executioner is feeling merciful, gunpowder tied to the victim's ankles. But that's not mercy, it's decoration. You've arrived at another auto da fe. And the crowd is giddy with anticipation. No one calls it what it is. Execution. Officially, it's a purification. Spiritually, it's theater. Functionally, it's a way to make an example, with flames licking at skin and souls alike. This one's for a man named Tomas, accused of Judaizing. They say he was found with candles lit on a Friday night, bread hidden behind a cabinet, whispers of Hebrew in the dark. He confessed. Of course, after weeks of questioning, thirst, and a few too many sessions in the inquisitorial chamber, he begged forgiveness, swore he had sinned. And so, the church has decided to be lenient. They're only going to burn him after parading him through town with a paper cone on his head and a sign that reads, "Heretic, return to the faith." You know, to give him one last walk under God's gaze. Portugal's brand of clemency had a very specific aftertaste. You shift your weight uncomfortably. The crowd around you is loud vendors, calling out snacks. Children perched on shoulders. Priests, murmuring prayers from under feathered hats. There's an almost festive atmosphere. Someone even plays a lute nearby. And it's all happening under the banners of faith and order. Because when the Inquisition stages its rituals, it does so with flair. Not quick. Not quiet. Elaborate robes. Silver censers. And the tight choreography of guards herding the condemned like cattle before the slaughter. Tomas isn't the only one. 2 women and another man follow behind. One of the women looks no older than 20, and her eyes lock with yours for a split second. There's no rage in them, just exhaustion. Her crime, someone whispers, was interpreting dreams. Another adds that she claimed to see visions of saints, but didn't have the right license. You don't even know if that's real. Historians still argue whether these smaller charges were actual threats or simply excuses to maintain a steady supply of bodies for the fire. When the ceremony begins, it's with grandeur. The bishop steps forward and reads from Scripture, his voice booming. You can't hear half the words, but the rhythm is hypnotic. Tomas knies. The executioner adjusts the ropes. The wind shifts slightly, sending a flurry of ash from the last execution into the crowd. No one flinches. Then the fire is lit. It starts slow orange, licking under the platform like a mischievous cat. Tomas shakes. The crowd leans in. When the flames finally rise high enough to touch his robe, there's a hush. You feel it in your teeth. The first scream comes quickly, but then, so does the smoke, muffling everything. Some cough. Others cheer. The musicians stop. One of the guards turns away. Sometimes, when they feel generous, the executioners pack the pyre with damp straw to make the smoke denser, quicker asphyxiation. Sometimes they add dry wood instead, so the condemned burns longer. It depends on the mood, the message, and occasionally, they tie gunpowder to the ankles or waist. So a small explosion will snap the spine and end it fast. This time, there's no pop, just crackling. And here's the bit. No one talks about over dinner. Not everyone dies right away. There are cases recorded in beautiful, grim ink of victims surviving for 15, 20 minutes, of breathing between bursts of flame, tied to a stake that burns slower than expected. And the crowd, They watch the whole time, children included. Because this isn't horror, it's state religion, with a front row seat. As the fire does its work, the priest continues to chant. You catch a line about purification through fire. Something about the phoenix, the rebirth of faith, all while the smell of burned linen, hair, and something deeper fills your nostrils. You think of leaving, but your legs stay frozen. Like watching a cart roll downhill, you don't want to see the crash. But you can't look away. By the time the ashes cool, the vendors are packing up. One is selling fragments of burned wood from the stake, claiming they're relics now. Another hawks painted medallions of saints who supposedly approved the burnings in visions. A teenage boy offers a bag of roasted chestnuts, cooked by holy fire. He says with a wink, "You don't buy anything." That night, the city smells like smoke. It clings to rooftops and scarves. Even the holy water tastes like ash. You pass a church window where monks are singing, their voices rising beautifully into the darkness. But you can't hear it without imagining screams layered underneath. You try to sleep, but images replay flesh curling, ropes tightening, the pop of wood splitting under strain. You think about how they say the soul leaves the body at death. But here, in this place, you wonder if maybe the soul tries to escape before the flames even start. There's a story. You remember something you overheard from an old merchant in Porto. He said one man, accused of sorcery, somehow survived the fire, escaped during a storm, his bindings slipping. When the rain doused the kindling, he vanished into the woods and became a healer, or a bandit, depending on who tells it. Some say he cursed the Inquisition and every town it passed through, but more likely, he died in a ditch days later. The empire didn't leave threads loose for long. Fringe accounts even mention mock executions, where people were led to the pyre, but then spared at the last second, used as psychological warfare. The spared would return to society broken, their neighbors unsure if they were lucky or cursed. A few lost their minds entirely, muttering psalms backward in alleyways. Survivors, if you can call them that. Eventually, the fires grew fewer. Enlightenment trickled in. The king got embarrassed. But for centuries, this was normal. A regular Tuesday. A place where punishment was woven into pageantry, and fire replaced forgiveness. By sunrise, the square is clean again. No trace of blood or bone. Just soot in the cracks of stone. You step over a faint scorch mark and wonder, does the stone remember? You breathe in deeply. No, not yet. The ash is still in the air. You wake up to heat so dense, it feels like soup coating your skin. The air is thick with wet leaves, unfamiliar bird calls, and the distant clang of metal on stone. You're not in Lisbon anymore. You're in the tropics. And you're not here on holiday. You've been sentenced, exiled, really to one of the most dreaded corners of the Portuguese Empire. Not a Yale. Not a scaffold. Worse, you're on a penal plantation in São Tomé. Or maybe Angola. Or Mozambique. Honestly, they all blur together once you arrive, because the sentence isn't 10 years. The sentence is, good luck surviving 6 months. The idea sounds simple on parchment. Send criminals to the colonies. Make them useful. A neat imperial solution to prison overcrowding. But in practice, these punishment postings were death by heat stroke and mosquito bite. The empire didn't build many prisons in its overseas holdings. Why bother? when entire landscapes could become living cells, you're handed a rusted machete. It's dull. The handle's cracked, but no one's offering replacements. And you're not allowed to be idle. There's jungle to clear, canals to dig, cacao trees to tend, cotton to pick, gold to pan. The overseer points, grunts, and that's the closest thing you get to an orientation. The first hour is miserable. By hour 3, you're bargaining with saints you didn't even believe in yesterday. Historians still argue whether the convict labor system was genuinely about reform, or just a convenient way to populate dangerous colonies with disposable bodies, considering the fact that no return passage was ever guaranteed. The answer seems pretty clear. You were meant to die here, or blend in and vanish. Some of your fellow workers are actual criminals, pickpockets, bravlers, smugglers, others, political dissenters, homosexuals, women accused of adultery, men who owed debts to the wrong cousin. The empire had a real gift for defining crime, however it saw fit. And for all its Catholic pride, Portugal didn't mind mixing convicts with colonists, especially if it meant keeping the labor force alive and barely functioning. The camp you sleep in is mostly thatch and mud. No doors. No privacy. No guarantee your hammock won't collapse. Mid-sleep from rot, you share space with rodents the size of dogs, insects the size of coins, and rumors that people go missing in the jungle all the time. Sometimes they're killed. Sometimes they escape. But most often, they just collapse from exhaustion and vanish under vines and silence. There's a priest on site. He holds Mass twice a week. Mostly, he preaches about redemption through work. You'd like to ask him whether sunstroke counts as redemption, or if malaria gets you a shorter stint in purgatory. But you don't, because jokes travel badly here, especially in Portuguese. You make the mistake of pausing one afternoon to rest. It's just a moment, just a breath. But the overseer sees. He doesn't whip you, that's too dramatic. Instead, he ties a stone around your neck and makes you stand in the river for an hour. To reflect, he says. You reflect on how leeches seem to like ankles best, and how your legs have gone numb. That night, you hear coughing in the next hut. It's wet, rattling, the kind that makes your own lungs twitch in sympathy. The man doesn't last the week. They don't bury him, just drag the body past the brush and leave it near the banana grove. The heat takes care of the rest. You wonder if he even got a last confession. Probably not. The priest's been ill. Some say he's faking. There are perks, if you're desperate enough to call them that. A rainstorm means you get to wash. Sometimes. Rations include dried fish that doesn't smell completely off. And every so often, someone smuggles in palm wine. Not much. Just enough to remind you of taste, of choice. The rest of the time, it's cassava, roots, and watery broth, so bland, even your stomach gets bored. You meet a woman named Clara, sentenced here from Porto, for seducing a married man. She runs the laundry zone, which also doubles as a gossip center. She tells you that São Tomé was once a dumping ground for orphaned Jewish children seized from their families, converted, and shipped out to help populate the colony. That was a century ago, but some of their descendants are still here, blended into the convict bloodline, living half-lives in the margins. You file that away with all the other secrets this place keeps hidden in the ferns. Some nights, you hear drums. Not European. Local rhythms slow. Low. Hypnotic. Clara says the Angolan slaves still practice rituals in the forest. Not everyone likes that. A Portuguese soldier disappeared last week, and the whisper is that he insulted a priestess. You don't ask questions. You just nod respectfully at the jungle when you pass it. Fringe fact. The Empire didn't just send prisoners here, it also sent undesirable women. Sometimes, entire boats of poor, orphaned, or scandalous girls were packed off to the tropics to become wives of colonists. They had no say in the matter. Their punishment was marriage, distance, and silence. Clara was nearly one of them before her affair gave the authorities an excuse to downgrade her to convict. She considers it an upgrade. On your 7th week, you collapse in the field. Your arms refuse to lift. Your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth like glue. You don't dream. You just blink and find yourself in the infirmary hut, being tended by a quiet man with more scars than teeth. He gives you boiled herbs and says nothing. You survive. Somehow. But when you return to work, no one looks you in the eye. You've become one of the faint, the walking wounded who might not last the season. There's no parole board. No one checks your behavior. No form to fill out. No sentence to serve. Just a vague hope that if you last long enough, someone somewhere will forget your name and let you go home. But you've started forgetting your own name too. The vines grow fast here. Even memory gets overgrown by the time the rainy season hits full stride. The camp is mostly mud. Your clothes never dry. You've stopped counting days. Some nights, you fantasize about Lisbon's cobblestones, even the prison there. But when the fantasy ends, the only thing you hear is the slap of rain against leaves and the slow, steady breathing of strangers trapped beside you. And still, every morning, the machete waits. You sit upright on the stool. Your wrists are tied to the armrests. Your ankles fastened to the legs. A single candle flickers in the corner of the stone room. And you're already sweating not from heat, but from the knowledge that things are about to get intimate. The man across from you is humming. Softly, cheerfully. He stirs a cup of wine like he's waiting for a dinner guest to arrive. But you're already here. You're the guest of honor in a Portuguese interrogation chamber. And tonight's entertainment is sponsored by the Holy Office of the Inquisition. The main course, no rack, no guillotine. The real tools here are smaller. Quieter, more precise. The man finally looks up and smiles. We just want to understand, he says in measured tones. And you will help us. You glance down at the neat row of devices laid out on the table. None are large. All are terrifying. At the far end sit the thumbscrews, unassuming iron clamps with screws that twist inward. Simple, elegant, perfect for coaxing out forgotten truths. You'd think they'd scream at you, shout in your face. But no, interrogators in the Portuguese Empire, especially under the Inquisition, were trained to be methodical, calm, almost pastoral. Historians still argue whether their calm made things worse. You think it does. There's something profoundly wrong about a man offering you a biscuit while preparing to mash your fingers into pulp. He starts with questions. Always questions. Your full name, your lineage, whether you've ever read forbidden texts, whether you've had impure thoughts about saints. He leans in closer, asking about friends. neighbors, cousins. The moment your answers start to stutter, the tools come into play. Your left thumb is the first to go. They nestle it inside the cold iron clamp, then begin turning the screw slowly. At first, it feels like pressure, then cracking, then something deeper pain, so sharp it swallows your thoughts. You grunt. He smiles. There it is, he says softly. Like a proud father. The room smells of wax and damp limestone. You focus on the tiny details, the drip of water somewhere behind you, the creak of leather boots, the tick of a clock you can't see. Anything to keep your mind off the pulping of your fingers? They ask again. Who gave you the book? You don't even know what book they mean. You want to say, what book? But your jaw is locked tight with pain. They take that as resistance. On to the other thumb. At some point, they pause and offer water. Not because they're kind. Hydration prolongs the session. You sip. Barely. Trying not to tremble. You think of how this could be happening anywhere in Lisbon. Yes. But also in Luanda, Bahia, or even Goa. The empire exported more than spices and stone. It exported its taste for quiet suffering. One priest is said to have tested a device called the pear of anguish, an iron instrument inserted into the mouth, then expanded to dislocate the jaw. Not common, but real. You heard a story in Coimbra about a man whose tongue was shredded from the inside out. No official record. Of course, these things rarely leave paperwork, but the whispers never fade. Fringe accounts speak of musical torture. Yes. Music. The accused tied to chairs and forced to listen to organ hymns on loop for hours while incense was burned thick enough to choke. A sensory overload meant to break the will without a drop of blood. Not very efficient. Though, pain tends to be more reliable. The man across from you continues calmly. You are doing very well, he says, patting your arm. He adjusts his cuffs and walks to the other side of the table, where a pair of iron boots waits. Not actual boots, more like molds. Your feet will go in, then the wedges, then the hammer, and with each strike, the bones will shift. Crunch. Protest. You know the pattern now. Pressure. Pain. Pause. Question. Repeat. You're not even sure what they want anymore. Confession. Names compliance. Or maybe they just want to remind you who holds the candle and who's stuck in the dark. Some victims don't break, they say. Some stare forward, silent until the end. Others crack under the mere sight of the tools. You're somewhere in between. You mutter something, a name. Maybe. It's enough for him to pause. He sits again, jots down a note, sips his wine. The questioning continues. Here's the twist. Sometimes they'd let you go after torture. Not exonerated. Just released back into society. Broken. Fingers. Twisted. Joints. Useless. A living example. Your neighbors would see your hands and know exactly what you'd been through. No need for explanation. You became the poster child for obedience. There's even a term for the after-effect silent redemption. The Inquisition liked the idea of pain, followed by piety. You were supposed to emerge grateful, closer to God. If you didn't, well, repeat, customers weren't uncommon. At some point, the candle burns low, the room dims, and the interrogator stretches. He says they'll continue tomorrow. You've survived for now. They loosen your arms just enough to be dragged back to the cell, where you're dumped on straw that smells like mildew and old sweat. Your thumbs pulse with dull agony. Your toes twitch anxiously, knowing they're next. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone ever lied just to stop the pain. You'd heard stories of people inventing entire heretical networks, naming neighbors out of spite or desperation, false confessions that led to real arrests, dominoes falling endlessly. A man sneezes in mass. Someone calls it devilish. And next week, he's under the screws. Some historians claim the inquisitors didn't want to torture, that it was a last resort. You roll your eyes. Sure. And leeches are a form of tender affection. The tools were cleaned too carefully. The rituals were too practiced. This wasn't reluctant violence, it was curated. A guard brings you water. You can't hold the cup. He tips it to your lips. Expression blank. You wonder if he pities you. Then you realize pity would be dangerous. Pity invites questions. And no one wants to end up in the chair next to yours. In the distance, you hear someone scream. Not a cry, a scream raw and jagged. You shiver. Not because you're cold, but because you recognize the pattern. The thumb, then the toes, then the boots. You mouth a silent prayer you don't believe. And sleep, when it finally comes, is filled with sounds you hope you'll forget. You try not to breathe too deeply. The air in this place tastes like old pennies and brine, with just a hint of something worse, something that makes the back of your throat twitch. You squint against the midday sun as it reflects off endless pale ground. It isn't sand. It's salt. Cracked. Hardened salt flats stretch as far as your eyes can see, glinting like a frozen sea beneath your blistered feet. Welcome to the salt pans of Cape Verde, where punishment wasn't a sentence, it was a slow, shimmering suffocation. Your souls are already screaming. The sun has heated the ground to a sizzle, and your shoes, if you ever had any, are long gone. Every step crunches like bone underfoot. You shuffle forward, with a flat-bottomed basket strapped across your back, its ropes rubbing raw into your shoulders. You're harvesting salt for the Empire, day after day, in a space so dry and white, it makes your vision swim. But you're not a worker. You're a convict, assigned here for whatever sin the colonial governor deemed inconvenient last season. Some say salt preserves. That's a cruel joke here, because out in this glare, people dry up like meat. Lips split, noses bleed, and skin hardens into leathery ridges. The only thing salt preserves is your suffering. The imperial court in Lisbon may have declared these islands strategic assets, but you know what they really are: sun-baked, open-air prisons with convenient harbors. You pass a woman bent double in the flats, scooping salt into a wicker basket. Her hair's gray from age or salt. You can't tell. She's been here longer than anyone remembers. They call her Avozinha, little grandmother, though no one knows if she has actual family. She whispers in Creole, prayers that make your spine stiffen. When you ask her what she did to end up here, she just cackles and says, "Born brown, breathed wrong." That seems about right. Historians still argue whether Cape Verde's salt flats were built intentionally as punishment zones, or just repurposed once the labor demand shifted. Either way, it's clear now this isn't just work. This is retribution in mineral form. You shift your basket, trying to ease the sting on your shoulder. Doesn't help. The salt gets into everything: your eyes, your ears, every cut, every pore. You've even stopped sweating properly. There's a word for it: heat anhidrosis. Your body's confused, panicked. But the overseer doesn't care. He's perched under a slatted awning, chewing something and occasionally barking orders. He's got boots, and shade, and water. You have none of those. When someone collapses like that boy over there, maybe 16, they don't rush to help. They just whistle. A pair of stronger men lift the boy and carry him to the edge of the flats, dumping him by a barrel of stale rainwater. If he revives, he revives. If not, they dig a shallow grave and toss in lime. The salt will take care of the rest. And here's the real kicker. Cape Verde was once proposed as a model colony, a place where mixed-race settlers and convicts could build something productive. You want to laugh. The only thing getting built here are blisters and regrets. And maybe, on a good day, a half shed with no roof. There's a story they tell at night, around the cooking fires, about a man sentenced to 30 years in the flats. No crime, just political nuisance. He stayed so long he began to believe he was part of the salt itself. Refused to leave when offered release. Walked into the flats one day and never returned. Some say he evaporated. Others say he fled to the interior and started a salt cult. Either way, his name's long forgotten. But people still glance at the empty horizon like he might reappear. Clara the same. Clara from São Tomé, who somehow ended up here too, says some of the guards play games. They'll offer you a sip of water if you can carry 2 baskets before sunset. Or promise shade in exchange for entertainment. One man juggled rocks until his hands bled, just for a mouthful. Another recited poetry until his throat closed. The guards laughed. Good voice, they said. Before assigning him double load the next day, you learn quickly not to cry. Tears burn. Salt in your eyes is no joke. Better to blink it back and let your rage crystallize inside. Like the ground beneath your feet, you become a creature of instinct load. Walk. Dump. Repeat. Fringe punishments exist here too. If someone tries to escape, they're tied down with salt piled over their chest and left until dawn. By morning, their skin's so dried out, it looks like parchment. Some live. Most don't. It's called salgesso, saltplastering, and you hear about it in whispers from older inmates who won't look you in the eye. One afternoon, you meet a man with no eyebrows, burned off. He says, not from fire from the sun bouncing off the flats. He's been here 8 years. Sentenced for insulting a viceroy's hat. You don't ask follow-up questions. The work doesn't end when the sun sets. Then comes hauling the salt into warehouses, lugging 50-kilo sacks on your back across uneven stone floors, slick with brine. You slip once and bang your knee. It swells up. But there's no doctor. Just an old woman who wraps it in soaked rags and mutters something about goat spirits. You thank her. Then get back to work. You start to dream of rain. Real rain. Long. Heavy. Pounding water. But the few times it does rain here, it's a disaster. Salt turns to sludge. Baths vanish. And the dampness wakes every wound like a hornet's sting. But for a moment, just a breath, you feel clean. Some days, a ship arrives. No one boards. It's just traders. They pay for the salt. and maybe take on a few prisoners as contract labor. A polite term for being sold off to another nightmare. Angola, Brazil, even the Caribbean. If your name's called, you go. If not, you stay. By your third month, your skin peels in sheets. You've stopped dreaming? Your fingernails crack. But something inside you has hardened. Maybe your will, or maybe it's just your senses giving up. Either way, you no longer flinch when the overseer walks by. You just keep scooping, keep marching, keep surviving. Eventually, the sun dips, and the white ground turns pink, then purple, then black. A few stars emerge. You sit with others around a tiny fire, sipping broth that tastes like seawater and regret. Someone hums. Someone else prays. You press your feet into the salt one last time and whisper thanks that they still work. Tomorrow, it starts again. The salt waits. You hear the crowd before you see it. Drums, clapping, occasional bursts of laughter. You push through the bodies, squinting past hats and parasols, until you reach the open square. And there she is, tied to a post, arms outstretched, ankles bound with rope, so tight it cuts into her skin. Her hair is wild, her expression blank, not defiant, not broken, just suspended. The men around her don't seem moved. They're here for a show. And today's entertainment, a woman, you never quite get used to it watching someone be publicly humiliated. But when the victim is female, there's a different kind of tension in the air. A sharper edge. Because the Portuguese Empire, for all its grand speeches about faith and civility, had a particular taste for punishing women. Not in the privacy of dungeons or behind locked doors. No. Women were corrected where everyone could watch. She's accused of adultery, though no husband appears to confirm it. Some say she was seen alone with a man by the docks. Others whisper she was a midwife who gave a nobleman's daughter herbs to end a pregnancy. Either way, here she stands, wrists raw, her body already showing signs of the lash to come. A soldier steps forward, whip in hand. It's not ornate, just leather, knotted, soaked in brine. He doesn't look angry. If anything, he's bored. He rolls his shoulders like a man about to stretch before a walk, then raises the whip. The first crack slices through the air and cuts through your stomach like it's yours. The second lands across her back. She flinches but does not cry. That makes the crowd uneasy. People prefer their victims noisy. By the fourth strike, you hear someone say, "Maybe she likes it." The kind of cruel joke that disguises guilt with mockery. You want to leave, but you stay. Historians still argue whether Portuguese colonial policy deliberately targeted women for public punishment more harshly than men, or whether society's voyeurism simply made those punishments more visible. Either way, the records are clear. Women were flogged for everything from gossip to healing to dressing immodestly to simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the punishments weren't limited to whippings. Sometimes women were forced to parade barefoot through city streets, wearing humiliating signs. Loose, liar, sorceress. Imagine waking up to that, carved into wood, and slung around your neck. Worse. Sometimes they were shaved bald in front of crowds, a favorite method in Goa and Bahia. A woman's hair was her dignity. Strip it away, and you left her spiritually naked. A fringe story floats in your memory, one you heard in a Cape Verdean tavern from a one-eyed woman drinking rum straight from the bottle. She said in Angola, a woman accused of witchcraft was locked in a cage with monkeys, left to be clawed and bitten until she confessed. Whether the story's true or just too weird to disprove, it stuck with you. Because nothing in this empire surprises you anymore. Back in the square, the punishment ends. The woman's blouse hangs in strips. Her back gleams with blood. The whip is lowered. But instead of untying her, the guards step back. She's left standing, bound, for hours. A lesson in endurance. Parents warn their daughters don't become like her, and yet no one knows her real story. Only her sentence. Later, you pass the church where, ironically, statues of the Virgin Mary smile serenely down from every alcove. Compassion, they say. Motherhood. Purity. But these same walls watched while women bled. You hear about another punishment the next town over. A young girl forced to wear heavy stones around her neck for a week because she smiled too freely at soldiers. Smiled. That's it. The empire did not take chances when it came to feminine expression. You begin to think that a woman with opinions was more dangerous than a man with a knife. Clara tells you more. Of course. She always does. She remembers a woman named Madalena, who was accused of being a bruxa, a witch in Bahia. Not for spells. Not for curses. For healing, Madalena gave women herbal teas for cramping, taught them how to check their own pulses, warned them against colonial doctors who didn't wash their hands. Her punishment, public whipping and exile inland. No one ever saw her again. At night, in the women's quarters, if you're allowed to pass by, you sometimes hear soft humming. Not songs of comfort, but lullabies twisted into warnings. Don't look up. One goes. Don't speak loud. Don't walk proud. You think of the girls growing up hearing that tune, repeating it to their daughters. A generational echo of fear. And don't think wealth guaranteed safety. Even noble women faced punishments, though always slightly sanitized. Instead of lashes, they got house arrest. Instead of public shame, they were sent to convents under moral supervision. One famous case involved a countess caught exchanging letters with a Moorish sailor. Her sentence, 10 years in a coastal nunnery. Forbidden to speak to men. Forced to copy religious texts by hand until her fingers bled. Better than the whip, you suppose, but still a cage. In the colonies, race often dictated the severity. A white woman might face embarrassment. A mixed-race woman, humiliation. An African or indigenous woman, pain. No trial. No question. The lower you sat in the empire's hierarchy, the harsher, the lash. And then there were the wives of the flog. As the guards liked to call them, women married to convicts or soldiers, punished for their husbands' crimes. One woman was lashed in public because her spouse stole from a Portuguese merchant. She'd cried during his arrest. That was disorderly conduct. You try to imagine standing there as your own back splits open, punished for someone else's misdeed. But your imagination fails. You've never had to carry your husband's guilt across your own spine. Eventually, the square empties. The woman remains. Her head droops. Someone brings water. The crowd has already moved on, chatting about dinner or church or politics. But you linger. You want to say something. Anything. Instead, you turn away. Ashamed. that the only thing you've been beaten with is your own helplessness. Later, you learn she survived. Clara says they let her go the next day. She walked away stiffly, arms bandaged, eyes forward. No one stopped her. No one offered help. Just another page in a long book of unnamed women with unearned scars, and that's what sticks. The silence afterward, the normality of it all, as if public violence against women had always been part of the day's routine. Sweep the square, light the candles, lash a stranger, wash up for supper. You wonder how many more stories like hers are buried beneath cobblestones. How many warnings are etched into the backs of mothers, sisters, daughters' testaments in scar tissue that no archive will ever record. And yet, the empire carried on. Its courts, proud. Its judges, precise. But its real power, that lived in the whispers that told women not to run, not to speak, not to be. You're not dreaming. That heat crawling across your skin isn't a fever, and the iron you smell isn't from a forge. It's real. You're lying on your side in a courtyard sun overhead. Dust in your mouth. The sharp sizzle of metal heating over open flame. A soldier stands by a brazier, turning an iron rod with slow, deliberate rhythm, like he's roasting a marshmallow at the world's least fun bonfire. But this isn't about snacks. It's branding day. And your name, your freedom, your very identity is about to be overwritten by fire. They call it marcação corporal, body marking, one of the Portuguese Empire's oldest tools for keeping track of people who were no longer considered trustworthy enough to be anonymous. Slaves, convicts, recaptured runaways, rebels, the occasional soldier turned traitor. The brand said what papers didn't: I am marked. I am owned. I am watched. You sit up slowly, wrists still bound, and scan the others waiting nearby. Some silent, some murmuring prayers, a few weeping openly. There's a teenage boy hugging his knees. His brand is scheduled for the shoulder. He ran away from a sugar plantation in Brazil and was caught stealing bread. Next to him, a woman in her 30s, eyes fixed on the glowing iron. Her brand is going to the cheek. That means hers is personal. It's not just about punishment. Branding is theater, control, erasure. The empire loved its paperwork. Yes, but brands were for the body, and bodies could travel farther than records. Branded once, you were known forever. No need for interrogation. Just check the skin. The man before you steps forward. He's old, missing teeth, and doesn't flinch when the brand touches his collarbone. You see the puff of steam, hear the hiss, smell the roasted flesh, and against all reason, you feel a pang of admiration. Then the screaming begins, just a second late, because even stoicism has its limits. Historians still argue whether the branding was standardized or left to local interpretation. Some colonies marked the left shoulder. Others preferred the right. Some pressed letters into skin, F for fugitive, L for ladrón thief, T for traitor. Others went for symbols, crosses, crowns, or, in one bizarre case, a tiny sailing ship etched just above the scapula, a reminder that your fate was now maritime. In Angola, they favored branding the chest close to the heart. In Brazil, it varied by region. Rio preferred the arm. Bahia liked the thigh. Goa well. Goa had a more religious bent. One prisoner was branded with a flaming sword to symbolize St. Michael's justice. The symbolism was poetic. The pain was not. A fringe detail floats to you, one you overheard from a drunk scribe in Luanda. He claimed some officials used branding irons shaped like stars, claiming it made them divinely sanctioned. You rolled your eyes then. Now, as the soldier lifts the next iron from the brazier, your skin prickles. It's not a star this time. It's a letter. An old, curling script. You try not to imagine how it will look once it's embedded into your shoulder for life. The branding iron is brought to you. The guard doesn't smile. He doesn't need to. This is routine. He's branded 30 people already this week. You're just next in line. He grabs your shirt and tears the fabric aside. Your shoulders exposed. You clench your jaw. Then pain. 1,000 tiny knives digging in at once. You don't scream, but you taste blood your own. Bitten from your tongue. The sound is worse than the heat, a moist crackle. Like meat dropped onto a pan. It on quickly, but the smell lingers. They shove you aside to let the next one through. You crawl, half blind, to a corner where others are cooling their wounds with leaves, spit, or wet rags. There's no medicine, no bandages. You're expected to heal on your own. And you will if infection doesn't get there first. You watch others get branded, one on the back of the neck, another across the ribs. You hear rumors that in some places, people were branded multiple times for repeated offenses. One man in Bahia had 6 brands. His torso looked like a deranged alphabet soup. People called him Livrinho, Little Book. You lie back and try to breathe. But every inhale shifts your shoulder and sends fire crawling down your spine. Clara is there. Of course she is. Somehow. She survived everything, too. She presses a wet cloth against your wound. Doesn't say much. Just hums a lullaby you don't recognize. You close your eyes. The pain flares. Then fades just enough to think. Some say branding was only used on slaves. That's false. The empire believed in visual justice. And what better reminder of your crime than carrying it with you? Carved into your flesh. Paper can be forged. A brand cannot. Except it could. Actually, there were stories of people burning their own skin to blur the letters. One woman reportedly poured boiling wax over her mark until it bubbled away. She was caught. Branded again. This time, higher up. You sit up. Slowly. The wound has scabbed. But it weeps when you move. You look at the others marked like cattle. Shuffled like cards. Forgotten. Like broken tools. But alive. You're all still alive. Later that evening, you catch your reflection in a basin of water. You twist your shoulder and try to make out the shape. It's a C. You think, maybe an R. You try to remember what they stand for. But it doesn't matter. To the guards. To the empire. You are now whatever they branded you as. Your name is gone. Replaced by a seared shorthand of shame. You think of noblemen in Lisbon with embroidered jackets, powdered wigs, sipping port, and quoting scripture while your skin smokes in a courtyard on the other side of the world. You think of judges in Goa, quoting canon law, then ordering brands for women accused of dancing. You think of the man whose brand got infected and spread so far they had to amputate his arm with a dull blade. You laugh, not because it's funny, because if you don't, you'll scream. The guards file out. The brazier is doused. The irons are returned to their cases neat. labeled, organized like surgical tools. The courtyard empties, but the marks remain. All of you carry them now. The Empire's permanent signature, pressed into living skin, and in the shadows, someone whispers, "Now we belong to history." You close your eyes and try not to believe them. You walk beneath the vaulted arches of the compound, trying to ignore the sting in your shoulder. The branded skin is scabbing now, crusted over like burnt bread. But every brush against fabric sends a jolt of fire along your spine. You're not limping yet, but you will be by sundown. Because today, you're reporting to the Jesuits. They say the Jesuits came to teach, to save, to civilize. And, to be fair, some of them really believed it. But once you pass through the gate of the compound, once the wooden doors shut behind you with a solid thud and the outside noise dies into silence, you realize something. These aren't the singing, praying school teachers you were expecting. This is something else. This place smells not of books or incense, but sweat and old leather. Welcome to a Jesuit mission, a little cathedral of discipline, where salvation often comes with a whip. You're not here for conversion. You already are converted, baptized, christened, and confessed more times than you can count. No, you're here because the civil court handed you over as a moral case. That's code. Code, for you're not useful enough to punish with labor, but too dangerous to leave uncorrected. The Jesuits greet you with gentle smiles. They speak softly, as though you're a frightened child, but every word has edges. "Discipline is love," says the elder priest, as he hands you a robe. It's coarse, smells like goat, and has a rope belt already stained from previous wearers. You are told to bathe, pray, and reflect. You are not told when or if you'll leave. The schedule here is rigid. Wake before dawn. Pray in Latin you only half understand. Work in silence. Eat in silence. Think in silence. Then more prayer. If you whisper, you're punished. If you snore during Mass, punished. If you eat too quickly, speak out of turn. Scratch at your brand. Look anyone in the eye too long, punished. And oh, the punishments. Not loud, not messy. No theatrical public beatings here. This is the subtle, internal stuff. Flagellation in quiet stone cells. Long nights kneeling on grain. Silence enforced for entire days. Cold baths. Ropes tightened around your arms until your fingers tingle. One time, you're forced to copy a psalm 50 times. Then, again, backward, you meet João, a boy of 15 who hasn't spoken in a week. Not because he's mute. He's just been assigned silencio rotativo, rotating silence. A favorite Jesuit tool. You don't know what João did. Maybe he asked the wrong question. Maybe he flirted. Maybe he got caught chewing. Here, all sins are equal, and equally corrected. Historians still argue whether Jesuit missions were cruel or simply strict. You'd like to invite those historians here for a week. Let them kneel on broken tiles and fast through prayer hour before deciding there's a statue of St. Ignatius in the chapel smiling beatifically. Hand over heart. You stare at it each night, trying to guess whether the founder of the order would be proud or horrified by what happens in his name. Would he nod sagely at the bloodied feet of penitents, or shake his head and reach for a bandage? Hard to say. Here's a fringe detail for you. Some Jesuits in Brazil designed special penitential whips made from vines instead of leather, softer, technically, but barbed with tiny hooks, meant to wake the soul. There are carvings in the mission cellar of men whipping themselves, arms raised, eyes closed. They call it purification. You call it Thursday. You try to blend in. Speak when spoken to. Pray with the right inflection. Bow your head a little lower than necessary. But one day, during your morning chores sweeping out the chapel, you find a sliver of parchment tucked under a broken tile. A note. You hesitate. Then read. It's written in a messy hand. They don't save. They break. Get out if you can. No name. Just that. You tuck it into your sleeve and say nothing. Maybe it's a test. Or maybe someone tried to warn you. By week 3, you're assigned to the punishment rotunda. That's the inner cloister where more difficult cases are sent. You're told it's for reflection. It's really for erasure. You scrub flagstones on your knees, while listening to others weep. The weeping is not discouraged. It's considered spiritually productive. A friar with spectacles and a quiet cough oversees you. He doesn't speak much, except to say, again, when your posture slips, or begin again, when you mutter instead of reciting. His voice is calm, like falling snow, but each correction slices deeper than the one before. The woman assigned next to you is named Teresa. She's from Goa, originally, accused of teaching young girls native songs in secret. Not Christian ones, real ones. Her tongue was spared, but her feet weren't. She limps when she walks, and she won't say why. You learn about the invisible punishments, the ones that leave no marks but stay in the body forever. Sleep deprivation, forced isolation, the practice of assigning someone to ring the bell of mercy every hour through the night, a form of penance that breaks the mind long before the body. You wonder if Zhao has had that job. He's still silent. There's a Jesuit joke, yes. They have those that goes, the whip is not the punishment. It is the invitation. You heard a young novice whisper it and immediately get assigned to 3 days of sackcloth duty. You don't know what that entails. But judging by his face when he came back, it wasn't laundry. And yet, for all of it, some people embrace the system. A man from Madeira thanks the priests each morning, even as he walks with a limp from flagellation. They saved me. He insists. They taught me what I am. You want to believe him, but his eyes dart too much when he speaks. You start to notice things. How the priests eat better than the rest. How confession isn't always private. How some penitents vanish without explanation. You ask Clara, yes. Somehow she's been transferred here too. Assigned to scrub basins and grind grain for the Eucharist, and she just nods. The Jesuits collect souls. She says, some of them forget to return them. At dusk, you're allowed to sit in the garden for 1 hour. Your only free time. You stare at the olive trees, at the birds flitting between branches, and feel an almost unbearable ache. Not for freedom, for sound, for laughter, for irreverence. No one here has laughed in weeks. One night, you dream of the sea, of slipping away from the compound, hiding on a trader ship, and waking up somewhere where your name still means something. But the dream turns, and the sea becomes a rosary, wrapping around your throat. You wake choking, your fingers clenched tight. Eventually, they tell you you've completed your penance. There is no ceremony, No absolution. Just a quiet hand gesture toward the exit gate. You walk out blinking. Disoriented. As if stepping back into color after weeks in black and white. You don't speak for a full day afterward. Not because you can't. Because you've forgotten how. When you finally open your mouth, the first thing you say is, "I don't know who I am anymore." Clara just nods. That means it worked. You don't remember falling asleep, only waking up to shouting. Not angry shouting, more like the roaring chaos of 100 voices trying to be louder than each other. You crawl out from under your tattered blanket and peer through the cracked shutters. It's the plantation overseer's yard again. This time packed with men. Their clothes are stained. Their arms crossed. Some holding sticks or machetes in the loose. Menacing way people do when they're not quite threatening yet, but could be. You hear the word vingança hissed like steam revenge. This is Brazil. Not the beach and coconut Brazil, but sugar country. Endless fields of cane that slice your hands like paper and slice your soul faster. You've been here long enough to know that justice doesn't live here. It visits occasionally, takes a quick look around, then flees back to Europe on the next galleon. The man at the center of the circle is whimpering. He's on his knees, arms behind his back. And you recognize him, Juca. A petty thief. He stole from the plantation storeroom meat. Mostly. And a flask of molasses. They caught him 3 days ago, but they didn't turn him over to the authorities. Why bother with courts when you have a full audience and a plantation full of creative punishers? The señor, the engenho, or mill owner, steps forward. His hat is wide. His smile is thin. He nods to a man holding a branding iron, then gestures to the sugar, press the same one that turns cane into sweet gold. You know what's coming, and you wish you didn't. They strap Juca across the wooden post and make him stare at the gears, at the rollers thick with crusted sugar and blood from the last example. He begs. He weeps. He calls on saints. No one listens. He stole from the mill. That's sacred. More sacred than human life. The punishment is this: he'll lose 3 fingers, crushed in the edge of the mill. Just enough to mangle. Not to kill. It's called mão cortada. Cut hand. The overseer says it'll remind him and everyone else not to take what isn't theirs. You're not even sure the food counts as theft when you're starving. But again, justice already left town. Historians still argue whether these corporal punishments were legal or just tolerated in the colonies. Colonial law books mention penalties for theft. But what happened on the ground, especially on remote sugar plantations, wasn't about legality. It was about control. If your labor was your debt to the empire, then your body was its ledger, and every wound was a signature. The mill squeals. Wood creaks. Juca's scream rattles the dust in your teeth. It's over in a minute. The crowd disperses, and the birds start singing again. Like nothing happened. You go back to the barracks that night and stare at your own hands. The calluses are deep. One thumb still aches from your old branding. You try to sleep, but you keep seeing gears turning. Next day, you meet a man with no nose. Not from disease, from punishment. He'd been accused of slapping a white overseer. Whether it happened or not doesn't matter. They cut off the tip of his nose with a sugar-cane blade. So he remembers his place. Someone said, "You ask his name." He doesn't answer. And it wasn't just men. Women, too. One was caught fleeing the fields after curfew. Her sentence was public whipping. Then, wearing a wooden yoke for 2 weeks. She slept in it, ate in it, bathed in it. The yoke was painted bright red, like a warning sign you could wear. Franga's stories circulated. One about a priest who punished his runaway housekeeper by sewing dried peppers into the lining of her clothes. Another about a plantation where slaves were locked inside sugar storehouses during peak heat caramelized. They joked, "You pass Clara. She's helping grind cassava today." But she looks up, sees your face, and mutters, "You heard about the dentist punishment, didn't you?" You blink. "No." She sighs. When someone talked back too much, they'd pull teeth. Just one. Just enough. She looks back down at the grinding stone and says, "Words are expensive." And then there's dismembramento, leave light dismemberment. An oxymoron, if you've ever heard one. It didn't mean chopping off limbs. It meant slicing tendons. One flick of a knife behind the knee or elbow, and a person would live, but walk funny forever. A permanent limp. A living caution sign. You're called to work in the field again. The sugar cane feels alive tall. Whispering. Sharp. It cuts deep if you grab it wrong. And there's no shade. You learn to keep your head down. Your blade steady. You don't cough too loud. Don't mutter. Don't stumble. Every small rebellion might be interpreted as sabotage. And the punishments for that are elaborate. One man was found with a broken sickle and accused of deliberate dulling. His sentence, tied to a cartwheel and spun slowly while being beaten with cane stalks dipped in boiling syrup. You remember the smell? Sweet. Sickly. By the end of the week. You don't talk much. Most don't. Words cost too much. But you notice one of the women hiding scraps of food in her skirt, sneaking them to a younger boy. You meet her eyes. She doesn't blink. She dares you to report her. You nod once and keep walking. Sometimes rebellion isn't about uprisings. It's about choosing not to betray. You do hear of uprisings. Though, Quilombo's hidden communities of escaped slaves and convicts in the interior, places where the empire couldn't reach. Some were tiny. Others became fortresses. Palmares, they say, survived nearly 100 years before being crushed. You start to dream about running, but dreams here are soft. Secret things. If they show on your face, someone will notice. That night, the overseer visits the barracks. No punishment this time. Just a reminder. A new law has passed. Flogging for escape attempts is now legal up to 50 lashes. New questions asked. Everyone nods. No one asks what the limit used to be. You lie back on your mat. The scent of molasses clinging to everything. The press never stops turning. And you wonder, as sleep takes you, if sugar tastes like blood to the men who sell it back in Lisbon. You trudge through the red mud path at dawn. Boots sloshing. Skin already coated with a thin film of sweat. The rain fell hard last night. But this morning, the air feels more like steam than air thick. Slow and choking. You're following behind a line of prisoners. All of you headed toward the central square of a colonial outpost deep in the belly of Brazil. You've heard whispers about today's gathering. Not a festival. Not a hanging. No. This is a law demonstration. And the law, out here, has a very specific color white. The colonial codebooks carefully shipped from Lisbon. handwritten and bound in cowhide, are clutched under the arm of a visiting magistrate. A man who looks like he's wearing 5 layers too many. His face is pale, his gloves clean. He stands beside the mayor and the priest, all flanked by armed guards. But the real message isn't written in ink, it's about to be carved into flesh. A man is dragged into the square. Dark skin, face swollen, wrists bound behind him. The crowd shifts forward. He's accused of theft, but the real reason he's standing there, shaking, barefoot, in the mud, he's black, enslaved. And the magistrate's here to show what rule of law looks like when the law itself was written for only half the population. The punishment begins with public naming. A scribe reads the charges in a booming voice: theft, disrespect, defiance, no mention of hunger, mistreatment, or the broken ribs the man received while being apprehended. None of that matters. The law here is less about justice and more about optics. Portugal ruled a sprawling empire, and maintaining power meant keeping up appearances, especially racial ones. Historians still argue whether colonial Brazil operated with 2 sets of laws, one official and one unofficial, or whether it was more accurate to say the law bent whichever way the empire needed. Either way, you're seeing the results with your own eyes. The man is tied to the post. The lash is dipped in brine. The crowd watches, not entirely in silence. Some cheer. Some whisper. One boy leans forward with frightening curiosity. You want to look away, but instead, you look closer. You have to. The lash falls. Once. Twice. By the 5th strike, the man's back is already weeping. But the punishment isn't just in the pain, it's in who's allowed to look dignified while watching, and who isn't allowed to cry out. This is racial theater, and you're sitting front row. Next to you, a mixed-race man freed. He says tightens his jaw. His mother was African. His father Portuguese. His papers are official, sealed, notarized. And yet, if the guards wanted to, they could drag him up there too. It's happened before. The empire's racial laws weren't merely skin deep, they were bone deep, soul deep, and endlessly flexible when convenient. He tells you about les decor, color laws, which aren't codified like tax rules, but lived out through beatings, restrictions, unequal punishment. A white man caught stealing might pay a fine. A black man caught doing the same whipped, branded, or worse. There's a rumor that in some parts of Brazil, local judges kept 2 sentencing scrolls, one for whites and one for the rest. Whether that's true or not, the outcomes suggest it might as well be. You hear about Maria, a free African woman accused of disruptive behavior for singing a traditional lullaby in the street. Her punishment, forced to wear an iron collar for 3 months. Not because she harmed anyone, because her freedom was too visible. Fringe punishments abound. Indigenous women caught seducing European settlers. Never mind that it's rarely seduction, were sometimes flogged and paraded through town with their hands tied behind their backs and their skirts cut short as public mockery. The colonists called it moral correction. The women called it nothing, because they weren't allowed to speak. Then there are the capoeiras, young black men accused of fighting, dancing, moving too boldly in public spaces. Capoeira para dance. Part martial art was seen not as cultural pride, but rebellion. Practitioners were arrested, beaten, sometimes branded with a C, not for capoeira, officially, but for subversion or aggravated movement. The terms were vague on purpose. You look around the square and see patterns you'd missed before. The lighter-skinned workers get tasks with shade. The darker-skinned convicts dig trenches. The guards speak kindly to the former, harshly to the latter. And when punishment is handed down, it travels through skin-like heat, through a skillet fast and unforgiving. One guard drops his baton. The crowd chuckles. The magistrate clears his throat and resumes reading from the codebook. The words are beautiful, poetic, even. Talk of duty, virtue, equality, under God and King. You glance back at the man on the post, whose back is now a raw mural of empire. Later that day, you follow Clara to a quiet spot near the river. She shows you a set of hand-carved dolls, each one painted to match a shade of skin, each one with different symbols carved into its base chain. Cross, whip, coin, the 4 laws, she says, as we actually live them. You ask how she knows all this. She just shrugs. You learn fast when your life depends on it. One night, after curfew, you hear a commotion. 2 guards arguing. One slapped a lighter-skinned servant in public, not realizing she was the daughter of a white colonist. The magistrate has to step in, issue an apology, and quietly reassign the guard. You realize then that white is sometimes not even about appearance. It's about association, sponsorship, paperwork, money, all things you can't earn, but only inherit. A fringe detail you can't forget. Some slave owners registered their mixed-race children as property, not kin. Legally, you could be both a father and an owner. Think about that. Then try to sleep. Eventually, you see the man from the post again, his back wrapped in gauze. He walks with a limp now, not from broken bones, but from the weight of being visibly, eternally marked. People step around him like he smells bad. He doesn't. You nod to him. He nods back. Barely. The magistrate leaves town a week later. The square is washed. The post remains. You run your fingers across your own skin that night, pale from dust, but still unbranded, still walking. And you feel the unease creeping in, not guilt. Not yet. Something deeper. Something uglier. The quiet knowledge that in this empire, your punishment depends not on what you did, but on what you look like when you do it. The air is heavy with rot and rust as you step inside. The walls are stone cold, damp, and covered with streaks of black mold that climb toward the ceiling like vines. You don't breathe too deeply. You can't. The smell alone might flatten you. Sweat, urine, salt, old blood, and something worse. Something you don't want to name. You've entered the dungeon beneath Elmina Castle, a Portuguese fortress on the Gold Coast of West Africa, where the walls don't echo, they absorb. You were brought in through the upper gates under the morning sun, past whitewashed walls and bright flags snapping in the sea breeze. From up there, the fort looks almost charming, like it could be the summer home of a bureaucrat who collects maps. But down here, in the holding cells carved into its bowels, this is no home. It's a trap. Elmina isn't just a fort. It's a factory for suffering. And the product isn't sugar or cloth or spices, it's people. This place was one of the empire's largest slave depots. And if you ended up here, it meant you were part of that terrible supply chain. They shove you into a low-ceilinged room with 30 others. No windows, no beds, just bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee. You can't lie down. If you fight, you do so standing. You're lucky if someone catches you. Otherwise, you're just one more form on the floor. You stumble toward a corner where water leaks down the wall. You want to drink it. But someone hisses at you, says, "The last man who tried got sick and never woke up." You believe them? The stone under your feet is slick, almost soft in places. That's not moss. That's skin, peeled away over time, melted into the floor. The guards speak in clipped Portuguese. They bark orders you only half understand. But the gist is clear. Sit. Wait. Don't move. Don't speak. Occasionally, they come down to count or take someone. No explanation. No return. The longer you're here, the more you realize the randomness is part of the punishment. It keeps you alert. It keeps you afraid. And when you do hear someone scream because, yes, you will, it's muffled. This dungeon eats sound. Every cry gets swallowed like salt water over a wound. Historians still argue whether the Portuguese intended Elmina to function as a punishment site, or whether its cruelty evolved naturally. Either way, by the time you're standing here, it's clear punishment was not an accident. It was designed. There's a slit in the wall where food is passed. Usually boiled millet. Sometimes, nothing. If you're lucky, water drips from the ceiling. If you're luckier, you manage not to catch anything from the men coughing blood near you. Disease moves faster than the guards. A man next to you says he was caught trying to steal a boat. He wanted to sail back home, wherever that was. You ask where he's from. He doesn't answer. His mouth is cracked, bleeding. He's saving his saliva for survival. Somewhere above, the church bells ring. Yes, there's a chapel up there, directly above the dungeon. Mass is held every Sunday. Right over your head. You think of the priest singing hymns while you crouch beneath his feet, breathing the same air through different lungs. The irony isn't lost on you. Find a detail. In some cases, soldiers posted at Elmina were sent as punishment, a sort of colonial purgatory for men who'd messed up in Lisbon or Luanda. The conditions were so brutal, even officers considered it a death sentence. And yet, they oversaw worse for others every day. They bring a woman into the cell next door. You can't see her, but you hear her. Her breathing, her crying, and later, her silence. Someone whispers she refused the governor's invitation and was locked in solitary as a result. You wonder how often that happened. You wonder how many ghosts live in these walls. Elmina had solitary cells the size of broom closets used not for discipline, but for disappearance. You're told about the door of no return, the passage that leads out to the sea. If they take you through that, you're gone. Not dead. Exactly. But erased. Shipped off across the ocean to someone else's field. Someone else's whip. Someone else's name. They take a man from your cell on the third day. No explanation. You catch a glimpse of his eyes as he passes. Not fear. Not anger. Just resignation. As if he's already boarded the ship in his mind. You talk to a boy barely 12 who was caught in a village raid. He doesn't know what city he's in. He doesn't even know what language the guards speak. But he understands pain. That's universal. They say the stone here holds memories. That if you press your ear to the wall long enough, you'll hear voices. You try it. Nothing. Just your own pulse, thudding like a drum. But later that night, you dream of footsteps that aren't yours. You wake up sweating. The man beside you is gone. Elmina isn't a jail. It's a waiting room for oblivion. And yet the Empire called it order. Order for whom? You hear about soldiers tossing coins into the cells to watch people scramble. You hear about women sold upstairs while men were beaten below. One man insists a guard made him dance for his food. You can't confirm it, but you believe him. Clara isn't here this time. You wish she was. She'd probably make a joke about how the mosquitoes have better manners than the guards, or remind you that even hell has corners you can hide in. Eventually, they call your name. You rise. Your knees barely work. You expect pine, but they just march you up the stairs. The sun blinds you. The air smells like seaweed. You squint and see the outline of a ship bobbing in the harbor. They hand you to a man with a ledger and a long feathered hat. He writes your name down, or something close enough. You want to ask where you're going, but you already know. You're not going anywhere. You're being sent. That's different. And behind you, Elmina watches. You're swaying. Not from drink. Not from fever, though you've had both, but from the deck beneath your feet. The ocean heaves, and your stomach turns with it. But that's not what's making you sweat. It's the eyes. Every sailor on this ship is looking sideways at each other. Jaws tight. Voice low. Something's happened. You don't know what yet, but you can feel it in the way everyone suddenly cares about knots and doesn't look you in the eye. You're on a Portuguese galleon now, halfway across the Atlantic, and someone on board has been accused of sodomy. In the Empire, sodomy wasn't just illegal, it was monstrous. That's the word they used, monstroso, not deviant, not unholy monstrous, and for seamen packed together for months at sea, sharing hammocks, secrets, and sometimes too much rum. The accusation didn't need to be proven. It just needed to be spoken. The punishment, as you're about to see, isn't supple. The accused is a cabin boy, maybe 17. You remember him laughing a few days ago, trying to juggle oranges. Someone claimed they saw him in the hold with another sailor. Maybe they were close. Maybe it was nothing. But now the wind has changed, and everyone's pretending they never heard his name before. The bosun calls an assembly. You all gather near the mainmast. The captain reads from a crumpled paper something official, some copy of royal maritime law that lists unnatural acts among crimes punishable by extreme correction. There's no priest on board, just a shriveled crucifix nailed to a barrel. Someone tosses seawater across the deck like it's holy. Then they bring out the rope. Historians still argue whether these at-sea punishments were formal sentences or just unofficial rituals, the Empire looking the other way, while discipline kept itself. Either way, what happens next doesn't come from a court. It comes from fear. They don't hang him. Not yet. First, they bind his arms and legs, then tie a cannonball to his feet. The intent is clear. Shame him. Display him. Then toss him overboard like yesterday's biscuit crust. But there's a delay. The captain hesitates. Maybe he's remembering the last time a punishment like this cursed the ship with storms. Or maybe he's worried about the bishop back in Lisbon. He orders a flogging. Instead, 30 lashes. You stand there, fists clenched. As the boy is lashed, his back opens. His voice breaks. No one moves. You want to look away, but you've learned not to. There's safety in watching. Ignorance gets you accused. After the flogging, the boy is chained to the mast for 3 days. No water, no shade, just seagulls watching like priests. You hear he was once studying Latin, wanted to be a scribe. Doesn't matter now. The sea has other uses for him. A fringe story comes to you told in whispers back in Bahia, about a ship where 2 lovers were caught and forced to fight each other for a pardon. Neither survived. The officers logged it as discipline by duel, and the Empire never asked questions. Another ship, the Santa Joana, said to have carried a secret brig just for moral offenses. Dark, windowless, 6 feet wide. If you went in, you came out wrong, or not at all. You meet a man below deck named Vicente. He's older, maybe 40, with hands like driftwood and a laugh that doesn't reach his eyes. He tells you about his first voyage, when a cook was accused of singing to another man too sweetly. The punishment, a mock wedding, followed by public beating. They made us throw rice at him while he bled. Vicente says, then they tossed him into the sea. You ask if anyone ever fought back. Vicente shrugs. There's nowhere to run on a ship, and that's the truth of it. At sea, escape doesn't exist. The ocean doesn't take sides. It just swallows. One sailor tries to defend the boy, says he was just being friendly, that nothing happened. The next day, that sailor's hammock is cut loose while he sleeps. He wakes up with a bruised shoulder and no friends, even in port cities. Punishment for sodomy wasn't limited to beatings. In Goa, one man was sentenced to wear women's clothing for a year and parade through the market every week, carrying a placard that read, Pecador de carne. In Angola, another was branded on the chest. A priest once declared that God's light will not shine where shame lives. Just before ordering a public burning, you learn to keep your voice low, your gaze lower. When a crewmate brushes your arm by accident, you both apologize. When someone laughs too freely, others frown. There's a line scratched into the wall near the galley. It reads, better the lash than the look. You don't know who wrote it, but you understand it now. By the 5th day, the boy is gone. Some say he died of infection. Others say he jumped overboard in the night. Either way, his name isn't spoken again. The captain logs the incident. As a disciplinary matter resolved, the ship sails on. You sit near the bow that evening, staring into the dark. The stars above are bright, indifferent. The water below is black and endless. You feel the ship breathe under you, creaking like old bones. You think of the boy's voice, the way he laughed when an orange slipped from his fingers. You try to remember his name, but it's gone, already swallowed by the ship. You feel it before you see it, that cold. Precise weight tightening around your neck. Not heavy enough to strangle. Not yet. Just enough to remind you that breathing is no longer yours alone. The iron collar snaps shut with a dull click. The blacksmith doesn't look at you. To him, it's routine. One twist of a key. One tug to test the fit. And you're marked. You've just been collared, not metaphorically. Not legally, but physically, mechanically, by imperial decree. Somewhere in the sprawling bureaucracy of the Portuguese Empire, your name has been written under a column marked permanent restriction, and now your neck bears the sentence. The collar is a band of iron thick, roosted, cold, lined with small ridges that bite into your skin if you move too much. There's no padding, No clasp. It's riveted shut with a hammer. It's not meant to be removed. And here's the trick. The weight isn't the punishment. The punishment is being seen wearing it. In Lisbon, the iron collar was a tool of shame. In Angola, it was a sentence. In Brazil, it was both. The man who wore it was a warning to others. And if you were a woman, it was worse. The collar was made tighter, sometimes adorned with bells, so that every movement announced your presence. It was a punishment you couldn't hide from, not even in sleep. The first day, your body fights it. You try to rest your head. It scrapes the bone at the base of your skull. You shift in your sleep, and the edge digs into your jaw. By morning, your skin is red, rubbed rav. After a week, the bruises deepen to purple. After 2, it starts to stink. There's a man in your barracks who's been collared for 3 years. His neck has grown around the iron in some places. He says he forgets it's there until it rains. Then the cold seeps in, and the metal bites. He's not bitter. He tells you he earned it. I ran 3 times, he says. 4th time, they gave me this. 5th time, they'll take my legs. Historians still argue whether the iron collar began as a prison tool or evolved from livestock equipment. Either way, by the 17th century, it had become a staple of Portuguese colonial punishment. In plantations, in coastal forts, in urban slave yards, anywhere someone needed to be reminded that they belonged to someone else. You try to wash, but the collar traps dirt and sweat in every crease. You use a cloth, slide it under the edge, but the rust bites your fingers. You give up, you start to smell metallic, like old coins and rainwater. People keep their distance. There's a superstition in Bahia that wearing the collar too long drives you mad. Something about pressure on the spine. Or maybe the ringing of the metal echoing in your bones. Clara scoffs when she hears it. It's not the collar that drives you mad, she says. It's the people who made it. The guards don't treat you differently once you're collared. In fact, they stop noticing you at all, as if the iron band around your throat has absorbed your humanity, turned you into furniture. You pass them carrying crates, dragging sugar sacks, and they glance at you like you're part of the background. One woman, maybe 18, receives her collar after being caught trying to teach another girl how to read. The priests had warned her before said education wasn't for her kind. When she got caught again, they chose humiliation over silence. Now she walks through town with her chin raised, bells on either side of her jaw, jingling with each step. No one meets her eyes. A fringe tale reaches you from the coast. A man once managed to saw off his collar using a stolen file and 3 days of hiding in a goat shed. He fled into the interior, joined a Quilombo. Years later, soldiers found him, recognized the scars, and brought him back. This time, they riveted a new collar on and welded a lock through his nose, for good measure. You hear another story of a woman whose collar rusted so deeply it fused into her collarbone. She died of infection. Her master wrote it off as natural causes. And yet, you still see people smile, not the guards, not the merchants, the ones who wear the iron. There's a kind of camaraderie among you. You start nodding at others who carry collars. A subtle tilt of the chin, a glance that says, "Still here." It's not defiance exactly, but it isn't surrender either. One day, a man walks into town wearing a collar painted gold. People stop and stare. He walks like a prince. Shoulders back, eyes forward. You find out later it was a stunt, a freedman making a statement. The guards beat him, stripped the collar, but the image sticks. The idea that the thing meant to shame you could become armor. Even briefly, eventually, your neck adjusts. The skin hardens. The ache becomes dull, like a background drumbeat. You stop thinking about what you look like. You start thinking about what they see when they look at you. Not a person, a warning. You wonder what the blacksmith thinks when he makes these collars. If he prays before heating the iron, if he remembers faces, if he ever hesitated. You doubt it. There's a phrase scratched into the wall of your sleeping cell. Just 3 words, still breathing. Barely. You run your fingers over the letters and add a 4th, yet. When the rains come, you wrap rags around the metal to keep it from freezing your skin. When summer returns, you soak those same rags in water to keep cool. Every movement is calculated. Every decision made with iron in mind. You begin to live your life in fractions, half steps, shallow breaths. Neck turns measured in degrees. But you live, and one day, if you wake up and realize you've stopped noticing the collar entirely, not because it stopped hurting, but because everything else started hurting more. The road is long, narrow, and blanketed with silence. You walk it alone, a bundle slung across your shoulder. The collar still chafing your neck, though it's grown familiar now. The guards didn't beat you today. They didn't need to. They simply pointed. To the hills. To the horizon. Go. They said. Your sentence is complete. But their eyes didn't smile. And they didn't offer food. Or shoes. Or even a glance of concern. Because this isn't freedom. This is execution by delay. A slow goodbye wrapped in false mercy. You've heard of this before. When prisons fill up or labor becomes unneeded, the empire prefers not to waste resources. So they release you. Technically, to nowhere. With nothing. Banished. They call it expelled to the interior. But what they really mean is walk until the world forgets you. The sentence isn't written in chains. It's in the road. The first night, you sleep under a tree. You think maybe this won't be so bad. But your legs are sore. Your food's already gone. And your neck is blistering from where the collar rubbed against sunburned skin. You whisper your name to yourself, just to remember you have one. No one else will say it out here. On the second day, you pass an abandoned mill. The windows are empty. The doors ripped from their hinges. A sign still hangs lopsided above the gate. Propriedade de Reino de Portugal. Kingdom property. You laugh. Then cough. The dust fills your mouth like ash. There's no map. No village marked as safe. You remember Clara once told you about places in the forest where runaways gather. Hidden communities quilombos. Mocambos. Secret villages built by the forgotten. Maybe you'll find one. Or maybe you'll just vanish like the rest. Historians still argue whether these forced releases were acts of mercy or cowardice. Whether colonial officials believed they were offering redemption or just clearing out undesirables without the cost of a noose. But for those who walked these exile paths, it made no difference. You either made it somewhere, or you didn't. You cross a stream on the third day. Your feet raw and cracked. The collar catches a vine and tugs. You curse out loud for the first time in weeks. The sound surprises you. It's loud, It echoes, but no one's around to hear it. You're not sure whether that comforts or terrifies you. A fringe tale lingers in your mind. One told by a toothless sailor who swore he saw a man, collared, like you, build his own hut in the jungle and declare himself king. He crowned himself with banana leaves. The sailor laughed and made the parrots his court. You hope it's true. You hope someone out here got to be king. Even for a moment, by the 5th day, your stomach knots. You eat leaves you can't name. You suck water from moss. Your dreams are full of laughter, of food, of a warm place with walls and no orders. But when you wake, it's always dirt, roots, and the sound of wind that never brings answers. You stumble upon a field once cleared for planting. Nothing grows now, just weeds and the skeletons of fence posts. A burnt spoon lies in the mud. Nearby, a half-buried boot. Someone else passed this way. Someone didn't make it. Eventually, you find a road. Not wide, not paved, but worn enough that you know it was walked often once. You follow it, and after half a day, you smell smoke, not the choking kind, but the wood-fire kind, and voices. Distant, careful. You stay low, crawl through underbrush, and peek into a clearing. There it is, a camp, not grand, just huts made of mud and woven palms. A cooking fire, a few people huddled together, eating quietly. You wait, watch, debate whether to approach, but your legs decide for you. They give out. You fall. Someone hears. They come to you slowly, not afraid, but cautious. You don't blame them. You look like death with a neck ring. A woman leans down. Her eyes are lined, her hands scarred. She says nothing, just lifts a gourd to your lips. The water is warm. It tastes like everything you forgot existed. They take you in. They don't ask your name. They don't ask what you did. That's the rule here. Apparently no questions. Everyone's guilty of something, or nothing. It doesn't matter. You stay in the camp for a week. Then, 2. Then more? The collar stays on, but they wrap it in cloth so the sun won't burn you. One man tries to pry it off with a chisel. Doesn't work. You bleed, but you thank him anyway. They have no priest here, no officials, no code books, just memory, food, fire, and silence. Children laugh. Elders hum. No one shouts. The first time you smile, it hurts your cheeks. You do it anyway. A woman teaches you how to weave. Another teaches you which roots are edible. A boy shows you how to build a trap for birds. You give what you can. You carry water. You dig new latrines. You make yourself useful. And at night, you stare at the stars and wonder if this is punishment or rebirth. One evening, an elder tells a story about a man like you, once branded, once cast out, who built his own home and taught others how to endure. They tried to bury him, she says, but he grew. The others nod. No applause. No cheers. Just understanding. You ask about the future. What happens when soldiers come? They all look at each other. No one answers, because they know the answer. When not, if the Empire remembers this place exists, it will try to burn it. Again, like it has before. That's why they never stay in one place too long. You tell them, "You'll stay until the rains. Then, maybe move on." They nod. The night before you leave, someone leaves a file next to your bed. You stare at it. Touch the cold metal. It's small, not enough to break the collar. But maybe, over time, you fall asleep with the file in your hand. And for the first time, in what feels like your whole life, you dream without punishment. You return to the world like a ghost, half seen, half feared, and never quite welcome. The jungle is behind you now, but the city ahead doesn't look like salvation. It smells of gunpowder and old stone, of sweat baked into adobe walls. This is Luanda, capital of Portuguese Angola. And the only thing stiffer than the wind off the sea is the hierarchy choking every corner of the city. The empire is alive here, fat and gleaming. Its courtyards are swept. Its cannons face outward. Its churches ring with Latin and discipline, but its dungeons are fuller than its pews. You're back among uniforms and orders, and it's not long before your file is confiscated. A soldier eyes your collar, nods, and that's it. You're registered again. Property. The collar makes it simple. You're not new. You're returned, and returns must be punished. This time, the punishment is public tethering. They call it exemplo de rua, the street example. You are chained to a post at the city center. Arms raised just high enough to cramp the shoulders, not high enough to break. A bucket is placed beside you. Water, but only for spectacle. No one gives you a sip. The sun is fierce. The flies, braver. Passersby stop, glance, whisper. Some shake their heads. Others smirk. You don't move. You don't speak. Not because you're stoic, because your lips are cracked, your back seared, and your body trying to forget it's human. It's day one. This isn't a beating. It's a display. The punishment is time, not pain, though pain certainly doesn't sit this one out. The guards change shifts, but you remain. A human lamppost. The city breathes around you, unconcerned. On day two, children toss stones at your feet. One guard chuckles. Another tells them to stop, only to flick your ear with a stick like you're a statue that won't perform. A fringe detail floats back to you in Goa. Some prisoners were painted in ash and tethered to the marketplace, with signs declaring their crimes. Some signs were real. Some were lies. Didn't matter. If the public believed it, the punishment stuck just as well. Historians still argue whether tethering was inherited from Roman traditions or an invention of Portuguese colonial imagination. Either way, it was ruthlessly effective. The goal was not to kill, but to humiliate, to brand you socially, to turn your misery into theater. A priest passes by. He offers no prayer, just nods toward the guard and says, "He must learn." Learn what? You wonder. That the body can become a billboard. Day 3. A woman brings you a cloth soaked in cool water. She doesn't speak, just presses it to your shoulder and vanishes. It's the kindest thing anyone's done in weeks. The guards don't notice. Or they pretend not to. You lose count after the 5th day. The city continues its business processions, sermons, executions, trade. Slaves are auctioned near the wharf while soldiers drill in the plaza. One boy, maybe 12, asks his father, "What crime you committed?" The father replies, "Disrespect." The boy stares at you like you're a cautionary tale, written in bruises and rust. Your legs buckle. They tighten the chain. You hear whispers of others who died on the post. One man reportedly had a seizure on his third day. Another was left through a rainstorm. Collar. Filling with water until he drowned. Standing up. No records exist. Just rumors. And the stone. Still stained. One evening, as the sun dips low and turns the city gold, someone ties a note to your ankle. You can't read it, but you feel the paper. That alone is enough. Later, a guard notices and snatches it away. He reads it, laughs, and burns it with his pipe. You never learn what it said. Eventually, they unchain you, not with ceremony, but with annoyance. The guard mumbles something about how the next time you step out of line, they'll just cut your ears off. No need for lessons twice, he says. You collapse onto the stones. They leave you there. No escort. No water. No food. A street sweeper nudges you with a broom. You alive, he asks. You nod. Barely. He helps you up. Limping. Leads you to a bakery, where the owner pretends not to notice your collar. You get bread. Stale. But warm. You cry when it hits your tongue. You can't help it. The sweeper tells you he saw a man once tethered for 30 days. Says by the end, he spoke in riddles. I forgot his own name. The post eats your mind. He says, not just your body. You ask what happens next. He shrugs. If you're smart, you disappear. But the Empire has other plans. You're assigned to a chain gang. Not the kind with hammers and railroads. This is a road-clearing crew. Angola's roads, like most of the Empire's infrastructure, are carved with blood. Literally, you dig ditches, move stones, drag logs. The chain stays on your ankle. So does the collar. When you bend, they clang together like chimes from hell. The overseer carries a whip with silver tips. He doesn't use it much. He doesn't need to. The fear does the work. One day, a man in your crew stumbles. Too slow, too weak. The overseer orders him lashed. But the man doesn't rise again, just lies there, breathing shallowly, staring into the dust. The whip lowers. The overseer sighs. Leave him. You never see that man again. You start sleeping with one eye open. There's talk of a rebellion forming in the interior. Formerly enslaved men gathering arms, building alliances with tribal leaders. The overseer scoffs. Let them come, he says. We'll brand them all before they even reach the coast. But you hear the worry in his voice. The shift. The possibility that one day, the punished might return the favor. You file that away like a coin under the tongue. On your 50th day in the gang, your chain breaks. Not loudly, just a quiet snap near the shackle. You hide it. You tie it back with twine. But you feel something stir inside an idea. Faint and flickering. You're not strong, not armed, not free, but you're not forgotten. And the post, you still feel it sometimes in your dreams. The weight, the eyes, the judgment, but it fades. Slightly, and every morning. When you wake and your chain remains tied with a thin strip of cloth, you whisper to yourself, still breathing, still here, not done yet. You've been moved again this time, inland, deeper into the belly of Angola. past the chain-gang roads you helped carve, beyond the reach of the ocean breeze, and closer to the Empire's rawest edges. Here, punishment isn't formalized. It's improvised. You're in a frontier outpost, where law arrives late and cruelty arrives early. The town doesn't have a cathedral, but it has a gallows. And right now, it's being tested for weight. You're not sentenced to death. Not exactly. You've been assigned a demonstration role. The phrase makes no sense until you arrive in the square and see the others already gathered locals, prisoners, even a few merchants. You're lined up before the scaffold as a magistrate in a plumed hat explains the day's event. The Empire, he says, values order, and where order is uncertain, example must be made. You're not the example. Thank the saints. But you're close enough to see what happens when you are. The condemned man is accused of desertion. He fled a military posting during a skirmish, was caught 2 weeks later in a fishing village wearing civilian rags. Now he's barefoot, beaten, and gagged. The punishment: a modified suspension, not death by hanging, but a method called strappado, adapted from older inquisitorial torture. He's hoisted by his arms, tied behind his back, then dropped not far, just enough to dislocate. He doesn't scream, but his mouth opens so wide you think it might break in two. You don't know his name, but you feel like you do. You've seen too many men look like this. Historians still argue whether strappado was officially sanctioned by colonial Portuguese officers or simply borrowed from European torture traditions and repurposed in the colonies. Either way, out here in the wilds of Empire, no one's waiting for Lisbon's approval. The man dangles, swinging gently like an unanswered question. Then the magistrate turns. And it's your turn, not for torture, but performance. You're made to recite a pledge of loyalty. In Portuguese, loud enough for the whole village to hear. You choke on every word, not from shame, from the collar's pressure as you speak. Afterward, they release the man. His arms hang useless. He's thrown in a cart and wheeled off. You wonder if he'll ever lift a spoon again, or if he'll just starve slowly somewhere far from view. Your role completed. You're placed into a new detail, stone hauling for the construction of a defensive wall. Angola's heart is heating with tension, and the Portuguese want their borders sealed in rock. The stones are sharp, the path steep, and the overseer has a mouth that smells like rum and cruelty. He finds a strange pleasure in exhaustion. The Empire builds with bones. He likes to say, "Let yours be useful." The work breaks men in two ways: suddenly or slowly. One man's spine goes with a single twist. He falls, and the rest of you are ordered to keep walking. Another man simply stops one day. He doesn't die. He just sits, legs folded, staring into the hills, refusing to move. A week later, he's still there. No one feeds him. No one beats him. The guards act like he isn't real. A fringe punishment becomes rumor, something they call the hunger hole. When a prisoner refuses to cooperate but isn't worth killing, he's tossed into a pit near the edge of camp. No food, no light, just rot. Some say it was invented in Mozambique and shipped here like gunpowder. Others say it's been here longer than Portugal itself. You never see the hole, but you smell it. One night, a woman is brought in. Not a prisoner, an informant. She's thin, wiry, dressed in torn linen, Her eyes are sharp enough to cut meat. She's been promised freedom in exchange for information about an escaped crew forming a resistance in the bush. She walks with pride. But you notice the limp. And the collar, painted over in white chalk. She tells the magistrate what he wants to hear. Maybe it's true. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. The next morning, she's gone. Some say she left with a pardon. Others whisper she was too clever, too dangerous, and now sleeps beneath the sugar palms. Clara would have called her brave. Would have asked what her real story was? You wish you could ask yourself. The days grow hotter. The guards grow twitchier. Word filters in that the empire is bleeding in Brazil, that uprisings are flaring like boils, and that Portugal's grip is slipping in more than one province. Here, the punishment becomes defensive. Officers lash out quicker. Floggings multiply. And even minor offenses, like sitting without permission, now come with beatings. It's not about discipline anymore. It's about fear. You try to stay invisible. You don't speak. You don't stumble. You don't smile. You make yourself smaller than your shadow. And yet, the collar betrays you. It clangs against your chain when you move. It shines in the sun. You can't vanish. Not really. You're a walking reminder that someone once stepped out of line. Then comes the inspection. Once every few months, a higher official arrives from the coast to evaluate the state of discipline. It's performative. And everyone knows it, but it means new punishments, extraordinary demonstrations. They're called, "You're lined up again." This time next to 10 others. Some collared, some not. A man is selected at random and told to confess to theft. He doesn't even argue. He just kneels. They bring out the carcanya, a set of iron boots, designed to be hammered until the foot inside them breaks. You don't blink. You've seen worse. But the sound metal on bone stays with you long after. That night, you wake up sweating, to your own toes curling, as if to protect themselves. You consider running again. But there's nowhere to go. Even the forests feel hostile now. So you endure. You count stones. You dream of oceans. You remember the way the wind smelled when you stood on the dock at Elmina. Long before the collar. Long before the post. One morning, a guard drops his ledger, and you help him pick it up. He doesn't thank you, but he looks at you for a beat longer than normal. "You ever work numbers?" he asks. You nod. He sends you to the storehouse. You start keeping inventory. Sugar, salt, boots, powder. It's not a promotion, but it's a smaller cage. Still, the punishments continue. You document each one. Carefully, quietly, you start writing with charcoal on the inside of your bunk names. Dates. Tools used. You don't know why. Maybe you just want someone to remember. And late one night, a boy from your old work crew finds you. He hands you something wrapped in cloth. You open it. A thin chisel. The collar. He says, "For when you're ready." You don't speak. Just close the cloth. Hold it close. And look toward the horizon. The chisel doesn't feel like hope, not at first. It feels like a trick. A test. Like maybe the guards planted it to see what you do. But it doesn't disappear the next day. And the boy who gave it to you doesn't vanish. He just nods when you pass. Like you share a secret. You hide the tool beneath your bunk. Inside the hollow leg of a broken stool. Every night. After lights out. You take it out and run it along the inside of your collar. Slow. steady, always listening for footsteps. The metal is old, dense, and unforgiving. Your hands blister. The chisel dulls. Your progress is microscopic, but it's yours. In the day, you continue the storehouse work, counting sacks of gunpowder, weighing bags of salt, stamping wax seals on crates bound for distant coasts. The guards forget you're a prisoner. You've become part of the furniture again. That's good. That's camouflage. Then, one day, something shifts. A man is dragged into the square, accused of starting a fire in the tannery. The magistrate doesn't bother with a trial. The punishment is branding. A red-hot iron, shaped like the royal crest, is brought from the forge. They strip the man to the waist, pin him down, and press the iron to his chest. The scream is high and thin, and somehow worse than a shout. The man passes out. They douse him in water and leave him in the sun. You can't stop shaking, not because you're surprised, but because that could be you any day, any moment, that night. You file harder. Historians still argue whether colonial branding was symbolic deterrent or simply a tool for inventory. Either way, it marked bodies forever. In Brazil, some slaves were branded with initials of their owners. In Angola, rebels were branded with a capital T for traitor. One officer bragged about branding a man twice, so the first scar wouldn't get lonely. In your dreams, the iron finds you too. You wake with the ghost of fire still crawling up your ribs. A week pass. Then two, you hear rumors of a revolt, not nearby deeper in the jungle, where the empire thins. They say an outpost was burned. A captain taken hostage. No survivors. The guards here pretend not to care. But they start checking the gates more often. Whispers ride the wind now. One night, the chisel breaks. Not entirely, but the tip snaps off mid-scrape. You freeze. Breathe through your nose. No one stirs. You tuck the pieces away. But now, your secret blade is shorter, duller, less precise. You want to scream, but you don't. Instead, you find another piece of iron part of an old hinge near the edge of the storehouse. You hide it beneath the same stool. You begin again. This time, you're not just filing. You're watching, waiting, tracking guards' patrol routes, meal schedules, which gates stay locked, which ones don't. You talk to no one, but you listen. You learn there's a well behind the tool shed just shallow enough to climb into, if you're brave. And there's a cart that leaves for the coast every 6 days. No guards, just an old driver and 2 oxen. It starts to feel possible. Barely. Maybe. You remember what Clara used to say, hope is a rebellious muscle. You gotta keep stretching it. Then one morning, punishment returns with new creativity. They bring out a man in shackles. He's chained to a wheel, yes. An actual wheel. Iron spokes. 6 feet wide. They stretch his limbs across it and begin to rotate. Slow. Deliberate. Bones crack. You look away. Everyone does. The breaking wheel was rare in Portugal, but resurrected in colonial settings, where message mattered more than method. A fringe case from Mozambique describes a man sentenced to a similar fate, with his body left displayed for a week. Here, they only leave the wheel up for a day. But it's enough. The next night, you file until your fingers bleed. You've worn the collar so long. You almost forgot your neck's shape. But now, a groove has begun to form. A line of weakness in the iron. You can see it. You can feel it. Another week, maybe less. You start imagining what you'll do when it's off. Not escape. Just exist differently. Sleep on your back. Drink without the clang of metal. Turn your head fully without slicing your skin. And then, it happens. Not with fanfare. Not with magic. Just a final scrape. A faint crack. A sudden lightness. You slide the collar off. It falls to the dirt with a weighty thud. You stare at it. That ring of rust and silence. Your shadow shifts. You reach down and pick it up. It still feels heavier than you remember. Not physically, just emotionally. Like you're holding a version of yourself you don't need anymore. You bury it under your bunk. The next day, no one notices. They're not looking. That's the danger of power. It stops paying attention once it thinks it's won. You walk straighter now. Not dramatically. Just enough. You pretend the collar's still there. You hunch slightly. You shuffle. But your eyes, they're different now. You think of running. But not yet. There's something else first. That evening, you sneak into the tool shed. The well waits. You lower yourself slowly, feeling the damp stone walls press in. At the bottom, you crouch in silence. You wait. Hours. Eventually, the cart rolls out. You time your climb. You move like shadow. You slip beneath the tarp. The oxen grunt. The wheels creak. You don't breathe. You don't know where the road leads. But you're not on the list anymore. You're no longer part of the inventory. And as dawn rises over the Empire's newest day of punishment, you ride away from it quiet. Bruised. But lighter, somewhere behind you. A collar sleeps in dirt. Somewhere ahead. The rest of your name waits to be spoken again. You don't believe you're free until the oxen stop. Not when the guards yawned at the gate and waved the cart through. Not when the jungle road grew wider and the smell of dust replaced that of sweat and rot. Not even when you saw the sea again, a glint of blue through the trees. Like memory, made real. But when the cart stops, creaking to a halt, beside a quiet cove where salt air kisses your face, then it hits. You're not being watched. Not this time. The driver, an old man with a face like carved wood, grunts and hops down. He doesn't ask questions. Just unties the bundles, lights his pipe, and hums an old fado tune about sorrow and wind. You wait until he turns his back, then slide off the cart and disappear into the underbrush. No chains, no collar, no papers, just bruises, grit, and a pulse that still thumps in your throat like a war drum. You find shelter in a ruined chapel a mile inland. The roof's half gone, but there's enough stone left to keep out the rain. You sleep there for 3 days, living off roots and stolen mangoes. You dream of Clara, of the boy with the oranges, of the iron wheel spinning in the sun. On the 4th day, someone finds you. She appears like mist barefoot, carrying a basket. She doesn't flinch when she sees you, just stares at your neck, then at your eyes. You nod. She nods back. New questions. Later, she brings others. A man with burn scars. A girl with a spear twice her size. A woman with a baby strapped to her chest and a knife on her hip. They lead you through tangled paths, through thorn-thick brush, to a clearing. You've seen places like this before. Hidden enclaves, Runaway communities. Quilombos. But never one so far. So silent. So deeply tucked into the folds of the earth. You ask how long they've been here. The woman shrugs. Long enough to plant. And there it is, fields. Real ones. Maize. Cassava. Tobacco. Not for export. For life. There's no governor here. No priest. No gallows or iron posts. Just people. Some collared once. Some branded. Some born here. Never touched by the whip, but raised by its memory. They work. Sing. Argue. Dance. And, when someone missteps, there are no punishments. Just conversation. Correction. Patience. It feels like heresy. Historians still debate how many such communities dotted the Portuguese Empire. Some say dozens. Others say hundreds. Hidden in maps, never drawn. Their stories weren't written in books, they were carved in roots. Whispered into drums. Braided into hair. Here. You're not a fugitive. You're a farmer. A roof patcher. A name without a number. But it takes time to believe it. At night, you still flinch when someone shouts. Still reach for a collar that's no longer there. Still whisper to the stars, just to feel you're not a ghost. One evening, around the fire, a girl asks you what your punishment was. You hesitate. Then you tell her everything. Not because she needs to know, but because you need to say it out loud, to name it, to let it go. When you finish, no one speaks. Then the old scarred man says, "That's one hell of a story." And the girl, all of 12, says, "It's not over." You start writing again. Not secretly. Not in charcoal behind bunks. But openly. On bark. In ink. On scraps of cloth. You write the names of the punished, the methods, the madness. You draw gallows and collars. You trace the silhouette of the iron boots. You write of the hunger hole, of the chisel, of the wheel, not for vengeance, not even for history. For memory, a trader comes once a month. He brings salt, fish, sometimes news. You give him a scroll. Ask him to take it to the coast. Maybe someone will read it. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. You've sent it out into the world like a prayer. Years pass. You build a house of your own. Plant trees. Teach the kids how to count sacks without making it feel like inventory. You fix things, roofs, fences, broken tools. One day, someone calls you elder. You laugh, then cry, then accept it, on quiet nights. You still hear the clink of metal, still feel the ghost of cold iron against your skin. But it's softer now, faded, a scar, not a sentence. And in your dreams, you don't run anymore. You walk, sometimes. In those dreams, you find yourself back at the post, chained, alone. But now, the rope snaps easily, the collar unhooks with a whisper, and the city square is empty, silent except for birdsong and a breeze that smells like cassava and smoke. You look down and see your hands calloused, strong, no longer shaking. You are not forgiven. You are not redeemed. You are simply free. And now, the fire's gone low, and the shadows on the walls have softened to shapes you can't name. The echoes of iron and shouts have drifted far into the distance, like the tide pulling back from a scarred shore. You've walked with the punished, seen through their eyes, felt their bruises, heard their silences. But here, in this moment, the only sound is your own breath. Slow, steady, uninterrupted. The story we shared tonight wasn't light. It was rough bark beneath the fingers, a bruise that blooms just under the skin. But even in the harshest corners of Empire, you found something still breathing, resistance, not made of swords, but of survival. A chisel in the night, a name remembered, a collar removed and buried beneath soft earth. Let that linger with you as you drift. Let your body unclench, your shoulders sink, your breath deepen. You've earned stillness. Let it wrap around you like a blanket, not a chain. And as you float gently into dreams, remember, the past may not always comfort us, but it can hold us in place, keep us grounded, keep us learning. Let it cradle you tonight. The wind's calmed. The torches have guttered out. The Empire, for now, has faded to mist. Good night, my friend. Sleep deeply. You're safe now. Sweet dreams.